Governor Doug Burgum is set to formally launch his presidential campaign tomorrow. But today, he penned an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal explaining why he's running for president in 2024. In that op-ed, titled Doug Burgum, Why I'm Running for President in 2024, the governor cites his reasons for running, making economics the top priority. The editorial calls out President Biden for his handling of economic issues and said the U.S. needs to recognize the real threat to America and strengthen national security. Now, we'll have a link to that op-ed, which is for Wall Street Journal subscribed readers, in this story on our website. Meanwhile, Burgum will be formally announcing his presidential bid tomorrow, as we said, in Fargo, and we will have coverage of the event right here on KMOT at 10:30 in the morning, and it'll also be streaming on KFYR+.